All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Appreciate you spending an hour with us. I am Kara Corches. I am President and CEO at the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I am thrilled to be partnering with our great friends at the Missouri Bankers Association to host this webinar. As you know, at the Missouri Chamber, our main goal is to protect and promote employers. And one way that we protect employers is protecting you from fraud and keeping you from losing your hard-earned dollars that you work so hard to earn from your businesses, and protect you from all kinds of really scary events of fraud that I never would have thought we would be talking about today, but we are. This is the harsh new reality of the world that we live in. So again, thank you for being on this. We are really excited to partner with our good friends at the Missouri Bankers Association. We work closely together in the Capitol, and we are excited to be working with them on this outside of the Capitol as well. So I am going to kick it over now to my friend and colleague, Jackson Hadaway, who's the president and CEO at the Missouri Bankers Association.
Thank you, Kara, and thank you to the Chamber for the partnership on this. Congratulations also to Kara on the recent announcement that she is the president and CEO of the Chamber. Great pick. As she said, we have worked with the Chamber and will consistently work with the Chamber at the Capitol in your interest and in the interest of all of our member banks here at the MBA. As Kara said, the purpose of this webinar is really to drive fraud education as much as we can around the state of Missouri. The most compelling and consistent thing we hear from our banks every week, every month, at this point, every quarter, is that fraud of all types, check, debit, ACH, wire, is on the rise, with check being the predominant concern because the business community still writes so many checks to issue payments. And so rather than continuing to just talk to bankers, we had hoped we would be able to reach out to a broader population of businesses through the feedback we receive from banks and hopefully drive more awareness, increase best practice usage so that your businesses, your communities are safer from fraud than they currently are. Our expert on the line is the Senior Vice President of Compliance Services here at the Missouri Bankers Association, Carol Barnett. She is unfortunately closer to most of the fraud that we hear about than anyone else. Every day she gets new stories, new scams, updates from banks about the damaging impacts of these kinds of fraud in communities around Missouri. But it also makes her very well positioned to share with you exactly what you can do to be safer as we see the wave of fraud continue forward. So thank you again to the Chamber for this partnership, the opportunity to do this webinar with businesses and with banks. With that, I'll hand it over to Carol Barnett, our Senior Vice President of Compliance Services.
Thank you, Jackson, and thank you, Kara. We appreciate this opportunity. First off, my disclaimer, I am not an attorney, and so I am coming to you from a banking compliance perspective, and I'm not a professional speaker either. It's just I've been dealing with these issues for many, many years, and so we're hoping to bring you some good information today. You should have received an email with the registration information that also contained a link to the presentation materials. That'll be the slide deck that we'll be going through today. You can ask questions throughout the webinar by using the Q&A feature. The chat feature is not available, and you will not be able to unmute yourself to ask a question verbally. But please use the Q&A feature, and we will have an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end of certain sections of this presentation. We are recording it, and we will make that available to you after the fact. And again, this is not legal advice. If there's something specific, because these are very complicated issues, you need to consult your own legal counsel for application of anything that I'm going to say here today. So we will get started with just some background as to why are we talking about this. Everybody is certainly aware of fraud, as Jackson and Kara mentioned. However, more attention has been paid to individual fraud, such as the romance scams, the investment scams, the phishing, smishing, all of those types of things where People are getting random text messages or emails or contacts on social media and being told to click on a link or to go to a certain website or call a certain number or something of that nature. So, but not a lot of attention has been paid to business fraud. And that's why we want to, because it's not as reported, I don't think. The press doesn't cover it as much, but it certainly has seen an increase. Probably in the past year, about every week, I am talking to one of our members about some type of business check fraud that they have encountered. So how did we get here? The pandemic obviously flushed a lot of cash. A lot of that ended up in the wrong hands. A lot of scams with the PPP program, the economic impact payments, unemployment fraud was rampant throughout the country. A lot of bad guys got a lot of money after the result of the CARES Act funds and other programs that were out there. So what have they done with all of that? They've invested in new technology to suit their purposes. They've bought copiers, they've bought printers, software, check stock, all those types of things. And now we're seeing this increase in check fraud. Even though the number of checks being written has decreased, the amount of those checks has gone up because people tend to write larger amounts using checks than other payment systems, perhaps. So everybody has always trusted the US mail. You drop something in the mail from your mailing spot and it gets to the end spot where it's supposed to be and everything is fine. Well, that's not so much the case anymore. And whether it's people going through stealing Christmas cards or what they think are birthday cards that have cash or checks in them, gift cards, those types of things. Now you can see on this slide how check fraud has increased 385% since the pandemic, which sort of took everybody by surprise. And so now we're playing catch up to try to thwart the bad guys who are out there. So you can see in the second bullet point how many pieces of mail is still delivered every year to how many different addresses, and all of those represent opportunities for that mail to be intercepted. So some of these statistics are a little old, and I imagine if we got newer statistics, the numbers would be greatly increased from there. So you can see 161% increase in mail theft complaints in just 1 year, which is a staggering number when you think about it. The last bullet point talks about mail thefts from the blue collection boxes. There was the St. Louis area had a lot of these going on in the past few years, and about 25,000 incidents in the first half of fiscal year 2023. In addition, unfortunately, mail carriers are being robbed. Some of them have been killed in their duty, trying to either steal their mail or steal their arrow keys, which are the keys that are used to open the blue mailboxes, and also ones that are like complexes, apartment complexes, those types of things. So again, these numbers probably don't represent the true picture. I'm sure it's a lot worse than what these numbers show. Whoops. Okay. So generally, they're looking for checks in the mail. You know, they've learned how to identify certain envelopes. If there's government checks, they're trying to identify them. Business ones are now being targeted more frequently because those accounts normally have more money in them. It may take the victim longer to notice the fraud because just of the volume of checks that they write, and the checks tend to be for larger dollar amounts. There have been cases of Postal Service employees stealing checks at the sorting and distribution facilities. However, now it's more where they are being recruited, or somehow the bad guys, typically criminal rings, are getting access to the mail through other means. The St. Louis area has had some arrests and some convictions of postal workers, and there's been pretty much everybody across the country has experienced the same thing. In fact, there's an article in the November 8th issue of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch about a recent charge that was filed against a Clayton postal worker involved in a scheme. And you can read that article and see the dollar amounts that we're talking about here. So now they're recruiting people to help them throughout this process, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So when checks are stolen, pretty much what happens? So there's about 3 primary outcomes that can happen, and this is where it is making it extremely difficult because of the technology they're using and how they're able to do this. So 44% were altered and then deposited. So that was the original check that was written by a business to another business usually, and that check is intercepted. The payee name is changed, and sometimes the amount is changed, and then it is deposited into the bad guy's account is the simplest way to put that. So that is a altered check. So the original signature is still on there. It's still the original check, but the payee has been altered and perhaps the amount has been altered as well. 26% then is they're taking that check that was stolen and using that as a template, using their fancy copiers, printers, their check stock that they can get to create counterfeit checks. So that's now a completely fake check that has been created, but because they had the ability to recreate a check that they've intercepted, they can create extremely perfect, almost perfect checks that are extremely difficult to detect as being counterfeit. And then 20% were fraudulently signed and deposited. And those are usually one-off type situations where someone's just got a hold of a check somehow and they're going to try to negotiate it. Again, that would be the original check. So in the next slide, and I'm not an expert in this area at all, but I've watched enough webinars and heard enough speakers talk about this. Basically, the term, what is primarily used is they wash the checks. So they have these chemicals that can remove the original ink on a check, replace the payee information with somebody else, and sometimes increase the dollar amount as well. Then they can copy these, print these, sell them. Often in exchange for cryptocurrency is what they're trying to do. Then they may also counterfeit them and recruit people to deposit them into their own accounts and hand over a portion of the proceeds. A lot of times they're using money mules, which is someone who they have recruited and who is participating either witting or unwitting. Unfortunately, sometimes they've recruited homeless individuals. This has happened across Missouri. College students, sometimes they're hard up for cash. They want to sometimes, and they're very active on social media, obviously. They can also sometimes be targets to participate in these schemes. Then typically, once the checks are deposited, the money quickly leaves that account. That's usually a sign of some type of illegal activity, because as soon as that money goes into the account and is available, it's leaving that account very rapidly. This next slide is one you can see at the bottom. I have taken from the United States Postal Service. I've sat in on some of the webinars that they have put out there, and this is where the bad guys live. Telegram is not what you think of traditionally as Telegram. It is its own website or its own, I don't even know what it is. It's overseas, so you can see up in the left-hand corner, does not accept U.S. legal process. And I know there are attempts to work through this type of thing, but it's a whole complicated law enforcement legal situation where these people essentially are operating in their own world. They have their own terminology that they use, their own language. There's a whole list of acronyms and nicknames that they use, you know, what we think of something, and it's not just fraud, it's guns, drugs, human trafficking, any type of thing you can think of. So what this is they recruit people on Instagram or TikTok or wherever, and then they move them over to Telegram because they can be subpoenaed by U.S. Law enforcement, and they're basically operating, it's the wild, wild west all over again. So they offer encrypted messaging, and you actually are not able to recreate some of the types of messaging that is shared. So you can see some of those images on there where they're selling checks, how they communicate with each other. And this is becoming more and more rampant. So this is just some statistics from a report that I found talking about 1 million stolen bank check images posted on over 700 Telegram sources the first half of 2024. Those numbers shocked me when I first read them. And so once a check is out there, then it can be sold again and again and again. It can show up multiple times. So pretty much as soon after they steal the check, before the bank or the customer has had an opportunity to figure out what has happened, they're posted within 8 days. And 75% of stolen checks are posted to Telegram within 2 weeks. And this is happening all over the country. There are reports that show obviously they're focused on the metropolitan areas, but pretty much you can find where pretty much every county in the country has been affected by this type of thing. So now that we've talked about why this is such a huge issue, then we get into, well, if there's a loss and, the bad guys, can you find the bad guys? That's what's difficult. If you can find them, a lot of times they don't even know what they've participated in. Someone that's here locally has been recruited. They don't even know what they're involved in. They're communicating with someone that they've never met. The money is being transferred electronically, and that's where recovering that type of money can be extremely difficult. So if someone's going to take the loss, who's going to take the loss? The answer is it depends, because it's not an easy answer. And unfortunately, all of the laws and regulations that cover this type of thing have not evolved with banking technology and the payment system. So in Missouri, we have the Uniform Commercial Code, which is Chapter 400 of the Missouri statutes. And then there's other laws, Regulation CC, which has to do with the availability of funds when they're deposited into an account. There are other rules issued by the Fed. Those types of things can come into play. And we're still trying to figure out, exactly how you apply these in every situation, because it's very fact specific, and that's the problem. So for an altered check, again, this is very basic. This is not legal advice. If no one else is at fault and the bad guy cannot be found and someone is going to bear the loss, generally it's going to be the depository bank where the check was deposited. They make a warranty that that check was not altered. That's extremely difficult to do in this day and age with the check washing capabilities. If it's a forged check or a counterfeit check, which is now they've taken the original check, sometimes they take the original check, make the copies or get the information they need out of it, and then put the original check back in the mail. So it does get to the original payee and is able to be negotiated. And then they have those images to make all these forged and counterfeit checks. So generally, again, if no one else is at fault, no one else has contributed to the loss, and the bad guy can't be found, generally the paying bank is going to take the loss. That's the bank who holds the account of the customer that wrote the check. Again, general rules. There's situations where sometimes more than one party can bear the loss. They might share in the loss if it was an equal contributor to the loss occurring. The customer can be liable. There are some provisions in the Uniform Commercial Code that put some responsibilities on the customer. They need to look at their statement. They need to report any type of forged or altered or counterfeit item, those types of things, to the bank. If they don't do that on a timely basis, and again, the contract between the bank and the customer may have some additional responsibilities built in there. If the customer is somehow negligent in examining their statement, reporting those types of things to the bank, and there are subsequent losses down the road, the customer can be held liable for those losses under the Uniform Commercial Code. Ultimately, though, everybody pays. Either they've taken a direct loss, as these are mounting, these are going up, check fraud in addition to all of the other types of fraud that is going on with individuals, or a bank may, have to reduce the types of services or charge higher costs because of these losses. And so this is where we're all in this together. We're all trying to fight fraud. We're all trying to do the best that we can. And that's where it needs to be a collaboration between banks and their customers to do everything in their power to thwart fraud as much as possible. Because the vast majority of this money is leaving the country, which makes it harder for U.S. law enforcement to recover or to arrest anybody. And then they have more money to fund more illegal activities that they're trying to do. So it's a drain on the U.S. economy, and it's a social drain as well. People are losing their life savings in some instances, and businesses are really being hampered if they're taking a loss from this. So the other countries' economies are benefiting, and some of them, their governments are reluctant to help, even though we know there are some countries where a lot of this activity is occurring because it's funding their economies. That's not true of everybody. Some of them are cooperating with U.S. law enforcement. So I wanted to run through a few examples, and these are all true that have happened to members of the Missouri Bankers Association in the past year. So you can see on the slide, this involved two Missouri companies. Company A, I'll call them, mailed a check to Company X. And the check was stolen somewhere along the line, probably from the mail. And Company XYZ never received the check. So what did they do? They contact Company ABC, said, hey, you never paid us. Company ABC or ABC company looks at their statement, go, yes, we did. We paid you. They said, we didn't get the money. We never got the money. So now the bank starts investigating. The check was paid to XYZ company, but it was deposited in a bank in Georgia. Once they had the check, they then created a phony company with the Georgia Secretary of State, had all of the documents to open a new account at the Georgia bank, and deposited that check. It was made payable to XYZ company, and so they deposited the check. This check was for tens of thousands of dollars. It was a lot of money. And I'm not sure of the outcome. I think they're still working through this. But, down at the bottom, how to avoid this? How could this loss have been avoided? A wire transfer, especially for that dollar amount, an ACH transfer, or some other form of payment to XYZ company instead of just dropping the check in the regular U.S. mail, or sending it certified mail or some other type of carrier, UPS or FedEx, that would require signature or an address proof of delivery. So especially if you're mailing those large checks and you have to use mail, that would be some possible solutions to avoid this loss occurring. Understanding they can intercept a check for $10, and now they have that check image, and they can create counterfeit and forged checks for any amount to anybody. So those are the risks associated with sending checks through the mail. The second example, and this may apply to some of you and some of you it does not, but a business pays its workers by check every Friday. The employees maybe, kind of come and go, or it's not a permanent employment type situation, or they're new to the area and they don't have bank accounts. So the bank where this business has its account, the bank has for many years cashed checks for these employees because they are drawn on that bank. So those employees, even if they don't have accounts, are coming to that bank. So they've been doing this. Well, a Texas crime ring obtained a real check, then made counterfeit checks and recruited people to pose as employees. The bank doesn't obviously know who all of these employees are. And I believe it was about $30,000 in total that was paid out that were fraudulent checks. So, this is going to be on a case-by-case basis, but some possible ways to avoid this would be using other payment mechanisms, increase the security features on your paychecks so they're less easy to counterfeit, work with the bank somehow to implement some type of positive pay solution or other type of way where the bank can know who should be able to cash those checks. Or maybe there's a way to work with the bank to open accounts for those employees. This last one, and this has happened multiple places around Missouri where the homeless people are being recruited and sometimes, unfortunately, coerced, threatened with bodily harm if they don't cooperate. And then they, again, get a Missouri business check, create counterfeits, and then they're so they're doing it as the honest check where the bank has the account of the business and getting the homeless people to cash the honest check and then pay a portion of the proceeds over to the bad guys. So this is a situation where positive pay, where the only checks to approved payees would be paid by the bank, would be one possible solution there. There was just an arrest in Ashland, Missouri, which if you're not familiar with Ashland, it's just a small town between Columbia and Jefferson City, where two people were arrested. They were out of a crime ring out of Georgia for this exact situation that has occurred. Wanted to shift from check fraud just a little bit into other things, business email compromise, account takeover. So in addition to checks, no payment method is immune from fraud. So fraudulent wire transfers or other payments from online banking. And this is where it is extremely important to have stringent either multi-factor authentication, callback procedures, other forms of verification to ensure that the transactions and requests are legitimate, especially for large dollar amounts. Some form of live interaction is what is recommended. And this means not just exchanging emails, because if the email is compromised, the bad guys are just going to say, yes, proceed. If they're calling back to a number that isn't pre-established, if there's some other type of multi-factor authentication that can be easily compromised. So this is where you want to, as much as possible, have some type of live interaction. And maybe it's even where you've established a code word or something to ensure that you are dealing with an authorized person. And then also as businesses, make sure that your accounts can only be accessed by authorized personnel. I know a lot of times I have seen scams where an employee has left, but their email is still active somehow, and that email is being used in scam situations. The next slide is deepfake fraud. Unfortunately, this is occurring more and more. You may be familiar with a Hong Kong story where the CFO of a company was convinced through a fake Zoom call where everybody on the Zoom call was AI generated to wire, I believe it was 24 million or something like that. And FinCEN, which is Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, just put out a report yesterday on the prevalence of artificial intelligence fraud. And it's scary. If you haven't watched any webinars or done any research on this type of thing, my voice and video right now can be captured and cloned. There are multiple websites that are accessible to the public, where as long as you have a snippet of anyone's voice or image, it can be cloned into another video. And I have seen demonstrations of this. Very inexpensive website where you can take someone's image and make them do or say anything. And if you're not listening for it and know to listen for it, you would easily be fooled. And we have had banks report where they have received phone calls supposedly from a business customer. And the bank did have a good procedure in place to have a callback and determine that it was not in fact true. Same with email type things. So again, ways to combat is the multi-factor authentication. I think probably eventually we'll have some type of biometric type of authentication situation. We're going to move into a little bit of, how can we all work together to fight this? Again, eliminating or reducing the use of paper checks whenever possible, especially ones that are mailed or that are of larger dollar amounts. Again, we've talked about using ACH payments, wire transfers, other digital payment methods. They're now getting to be more popular real-time payments FedNow is one example. The Clearinghouse Real-Time Payments Network is another one. And this is where it can be an instantaneous exchange, 24/7, 365 days a year of money. So that's something that I think will continue to grow. It's fairly new and not everybody is involved in it, but it is something that I think we will see more of used in the future. Also, if you're receiving checks from your customers, try to encourage them or give them opportunities to pay you through digital methods instead of mailing checks to you. For ones you can convert to electronic payments using positive pay solutions, this may vary by bank. Typically, it's going to compare checks presented for payment against a list of checks issued by the business. And so the date, the check number, the payee, the signature, and the amount must all match for the payment to proceed. Again, the one in Georgia, it would not have caught that because it was the proper payee and it just was an imposter. So that's where, I don't know that there's a foolproof method that will stop every single situation when a check is involved. If you are using checks, there's a lot of check companies have implemented a lot of security features, watermarks, using certain inks. If they're handwriting checks, if you have, friends, family members still handwriting checks, there are black gel inks that can be used that are harder to wash. So basically, if you are still using checks, the criminals are going to look for the easiest ones, the ones that are just plain old check stock with no security features on them at all. Those are going to be the easiest ones to counterfeit. So there are a lot of security features that you might be able to implement. If you do send or receive large quantities of checks, use secure mailboxes for incoming mail and empty them as soon as the mail is delivered every day. There was a case out of the pandemic. In the early year of the pandemic, it was a church that ended up losing $90,000. Because what did everybody do? They stopped going to church, but they were still supporting the church, so they were mailing checks to the church. Well, the church didn't know, which checks they were going to get. And so the bad guys would steal just enough checks out of the mail, so they were still getting some, but stealing some of them. The contributors looked to see, yes, this check number for this amount for $100 cleared my account. They didn't realize that it had been altered. So that's where using secure mailboxes and emptying those immediately are important. If you're mailing them, take them directly to the post office. Don't leave them in an outgoing mailbox for pickup, or don't put them in one of the blue boxes, especially if it's not going to be picked up immediately. Don't leave it in there if it's going to be overnight, especially. If anyone is requesting a large payment by check from you that you've never paid by check before, it could be just a scheme for them to get your check stock. So make sure that you know who you're sending it to and that you are sending it to the right person, and perhaps using a proof of delivery service. First steps is reconciling your accounts frequently, pretty much continually. You have to these days to look at pending items. If it's a pending ACH debit, there are times if you did not authorize that, those can be reversed. But again, it has to be done on a timely basis. Speed is important in trying to resolve some of these situations as much as possible. Work with your bank about solutions that they may have available to you, text message alerts or some other type of alert when some unusual transaction is happening on your account. We're seeing more and more of the spam texts that are supposedly from your bank. There's been several of those that have occurred at Missouri banks. I mean, this is not just targeting businesses, this is targeting everybody. They're just blasting out these texts. Typically related to debit card or Zelle transactions, those types of things. So if you get some type of strange text or email or phone call supposedly from your bank, don't reply or click on a text link or in an email link, and always call the bank number that you know and not some random number that they have put in a text or email for you to contact them, because you're going to be talking to the bad guy. And then educate your employees and customers about fraud vulnerabilities. We have some information about check fraud that might be helpful. And then if there is a fraud or fraud attempt, immediately notify your bank so they can take action to protect you from further losses. Law enforcement may need to get involved depending on the situation. If it is mail, the United States Postal Inspection Service can be reported to them so they can determine if it's an isolated instance or track down some type of commonality. If it is on the internet, and so it's related to an online scam or crypto or wire or something of that is involved, you can report it to ic3.gov, and they can sometimes recover an illegal payment if it is reported immediately. If it's wire or crypto, even if it is perhaps left the country, sometimes they can recover that. But again, speed is important. So we'll pause here for a second to see if there are any questions that have come in. We probably can't answer real specific questions, but David Kent, our Senior Vice President, Chief Lobbyist, has been monitoring questions. David, do we have anything?
We don't have anything yet. I just want to remind everyone down at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A, you are able to submit questions through that portal, and I'll be able to read those and ask those to Carol or to Diane. I'll take just a few brief moments and talk a little bit about some legislation that we intend to sponsor and support for next year. Some of it dealing with the consumer side, particularly on a trusted contact or protecting banks against liability for offering their customers a trusted contact. What that would simply do is just allow banks to offer their customers someone that they trust. It could be an attorney, it could be a preacher, it could be a family member, for that bank to be able to call that trusted contact to prevent the customer from getting involved in a romance scam and perhaps sending $25,000 to someone they just met over Zoom to help their son get out of jail, or one of the many romance scams that we have heard about here at the MBA. We'll also be taking a look at the criminal code and some things that we can do to help the prosecuting attorneys prosecute these types of folks when they do catch them in the middle of fraud. We've also, the Missouri Retailers Association has reached out to us. They've been experiencing some gift card fraud and ways to beef up the current statute in order to help prevent that from happening as well. So there's obviously a lot going on with the business community, with banks and everyone else, and the consumer side. One thing, we really need to highlight this. We need to put a spotlight on this issue with our legislators. So any connections that you have, for those of you listening, to whether that's on the federal level or on the state level, please contact them, email them, call them, encourage them to support legislative efforts, both on the state and federal level, to help us prevent, or at least provide some tools in the toolbox to help us prevent fraud or potential fraud. Carol, I think that is about it on our side. Unless, do you have any final? I can close it out, but do you have any final comments?
We're going to switch quickly to just talk about one other topic that's not related to fraud, but does affect businesses in Missouri, and this is the beneficial ownership reporting requirements. And just real briefly, in 2021, Congress passed the Corporate Transparency Act. This has been requested by law enforcement for years. And so just wanted to make everyone aware, if you have a corporation, oops, I have a typo. I put LCC, it should be LLC, or other entity created by filing a document with the Secretary of State, there is now a requirement for you to take some action regarding your ownership of your company. So there are 23 types of entities that are exempt, such as publicly traded companies, and nonprofit organizations are exempt. And so those of you that have opened an account at a bank in the past few years, you've had to fill out a form, give them information on your owners that own more than 25% of your business. That's a separate requirement, and that is currently still in place. So what is the urgency on this? The registry was established January 1st of 2024, and any new business established on or after that date was required to register with the FinCEN registry within a certain period of time. Businesses that were in existence prior to January 1st, 2024 now have until January 1st, 2025 to complete the registration process. So information is reported about the company itself and also about the individuals who ultimately own or control it. Once you've registered, then any changes about the company must also be uploaded to the FinCEN website as well. What we wanted to point out is registration is free online. Again, here come the scammers. They're trying, they're sending out emails to business saying, hey, we'll assist you in doing this filing because it's so complicated and here's a fee, we're going to charge you. Well, now they have information about your account, about your company that they can use now to go create another phony company somewhere else. Because it's very easy, as you know, to register with the Secretary of State. It's not extremely difficult or time consuming. So if you do need some assistance, only use your trusted attorney or your accountants if you need assistance from them in determining how you need to register. So I've put the link fincen.gov/BOI. They have all kinds of resources on that website. They have videos, they have a whole list of FAQs, they have compliance guides, and all kinds of information on there as to how you comply with the beneficial ownership registry requirements. So again, these are for entities. A sole proprietor that's just an individual, it does not apply, but it's for an entity that's registered with the Secretary of State. So that was just a brief information on that. Does anybody have any questions related to that?
Well, I'm not seeing it. Oh, hey, let's see.
Some of these are really specific questions I think that have come in. And if you want to reach out to me individually, I'd be happy to visit with you. I didn't put my email address in the slides, but my email is cbarnett@mobankers.com. That's CBARNETT@mobankers.com. Or you can call the MBA at 573-636-8151 and ask for me, and I would be happy to visit with you on any specific questions. If there are any specific to the chamber that can help you with, you should have their contact information and you can give them a call or email as well. David, I'll let you close it out.
Yep. Carol, could you speak just briefly to maybe some of the privacy or the confidentiality requirements under law for banks, particularly if it's one particular customer or not, whether it's commercial or on the consumer side? What banks can share and what they can't due to federal law?
It does get a little dicey, depending on if the bank has filed a suspicious activity report, then they can converse with law enforcement about the information that they have filed in the suspicious activity report that is sent to FinCEN. If it's just a bank-to-bank type thing, there is a process called 314B, where banks can register with FinCEN to exchange information with each other about certain types of situations that come up. For a bank to just visit with a customer about potential fraud, they can visit about their experience or their transaction with their own customer. They can't share information about someone else that might have done business with that customer. So privacy laws are very restrictive and it gets very complicated. A lot of it depends if law enforcement is involved or not. But there are starting to be more efforts, and the American Bankers Association and I think other groups are pushing for the White House to develop a task force on fraud or some type of nationwide commission to bring all parties together, because that's the problem. We're all operating in silos because of restrictions and can't always share information with each other.
Just highlights the point, talk to your legislators, push them in action. We really need it. We need to share your stories.
Yeah, need things on a state level and especially on the federal level.
Well, Carol, Diane, thank you so much. And for all of our registrants today, we really appreciate you jumping on. We had a little bit over 100 folks today. I know this is an important topic for all of us. Appreciate the Chamber for giving us the opportunity to provide some perspective on fraud that we're seeing and dealing with. And we know that you all on the call are as well. So thank you all very much for joining. Again, Carol and the Chamber's information is in the chat room, so you're available to view it there. And please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us here at the MBA or at the Missouri Chamber for any follow-up questions. With that, I will close. Thank you so much.